everyone. Welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. We are a nonprofit, SPED Homeschool is, and we put on this broadcast every Tuesday night to talk about different topics. And tonight, our topic is creating positive learning environments from challenging homeschooling situations. And our guest is Cindy LaJoy. Welcome,
Hi.
Cindy, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Peggy.
I am so excited. So we are continuing a month-long series on we're covering adoption in all of our articles and broadcasts, and just some different perspectives of parents that have adopted. And you have 5 adopted children.
I do. 5. We have no biological children. All 5 are adopted, and they're all mostly young adults now.
Yeah, and that's a whole new challenge in itself, like we were talking about before the podcast started.
It definitely is. Yeah. As I said, new phase, new era we're moving into for sure.
Definitely. So, but yeah, we would love to, as we get started, just learn a little bit about your story and your family, and also we're going to talk about just your passion in homeschooling, which is kind of those high school transition years. And
well, it better be my passion since I'm there now.
Yes, exactly. You may have a different passion in years to come, but right now.
At the moment, that's what it's going to be for sure.
Right.
So we have 5 children. We adopted all of our children from orphanages in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. 4 of them came from Kazakhstan and 1 from Kyrgyzstan. We had 2 infant adoptions, which were not newborn. They were 11 months old each when they came home.
Mm-hmm.
Our sons, Matt and Josh. And they were our first 2. And then we moved to older child adoption. And we adopted Kenny at 8.5, and he was from Kyrgyzstan. And then we adopted Angela and Alessia, who are biological sisters from Petropavlovsk, Kazakhstan. And they were 10 and 12 at the time. Now our oldest 4 are a year and 4 months apart. That was not planned. We didn't find out one was a year older than we thought until after the adoption was final. So that was a surprise. Yeah. So we have our 4 are 20 and 21 right now, all 4 of them. And then our youngest is 17. And so we started homeschooling. Our girls came home last. They've been home 10 years, actually on Valentine's Day. And so we started homeschooling the year that they came home.
Okay.
Terrified me. That was not in the plan at all. Not in the plan.
Right.
My son Matt was just starting 5th grade, and things were not going well for him. He is considered twice exceptional. At the time, we didn't know he was also gifted, but we knew that he was ahead of his class significantly, and we actually started homeschooling because of that. We ended up needing to homeschool because of all the special needs in other directions. But you can lose your child just as easily if they're.
Oops, just lost Cindy. Hopefully she will be back soon. She's right. You can lose your child in the system, definitely. So I'm going to have a comment here. Let's see. Mindy says hello. So hi, Mindy. Yes. So we're going to see if we can get Cindy back in just a minute. But while she is trying to get back onto the studio, I am just going to let you know that if you want to be part of this conversation, definitely put your comments in the feed. So good to see you back, Cindy.
Sorry about that. I don't know quite what happened there, but I was saying you can lose your child just as easily if they're gifted in a classroom as you can if they're learning disabled.
Yes.
And that's something, people don't think of giftedness as special needs in the ways that they really ought to, because they really do have special needs that need to be met. And so that's how we started out homeschooling, was trying to find a good fit for him. He was later diagnosed with dysgraphia and slow processing speed, and yet higher IQ. And he's all over the map and a very interesting kid. So in the year that we started homeschooling, we brought Matt home, and 3 months later, we traveled to Kazakhstan expecting to be gone for 2 weeks and ended up gone 2.5 months. We weren't really prepared for that. And thankfully, we had our boys with us. And I knew we were being called to homeschool them all. And I was a little shocked. And it was during that trip, working with Kenny, who is probably our most challenged student,
Mhm.
that we really realized Kenny had been home about 3 years at that point, and the public school had continued to tell us that it was language learning issues because he and the girls came home with no English. They came home, as Russian speakers, and
Okay.
we knew there was something else wrong. And on that trip, it really became apparent as I was working with him one-on-one with reading and couldn't remember like definitions of words from one page to the next to the point that he was sobbing.
Mhm.
And so through this really stressful period, and then we were bringing home two girls who it became apparent really had about a preschool education. We
Mm.
literally started at preschool when they came home. And so I remember pacing my apartment that we had rented there and sobbing because I was so
Oh,
terrified of this because I was going to be heading home with two girls with no English who were
right.
10 and 12. Yeah, 10 and 12 and thought mermaids were real and
Uh-huh.
didn't know that even though you saw an ocean on a map and it was an ocean that you couldn't drive to America. And
Yeah.
and we had to do things like teach what meat was, what was chicken and what was beef and what went into a freezer and what went into a pantry cupboard. And we really started from scratch with kids
Yeah,
that old.
definitely.
And so there was no hope of that fitting in a public school arena. And I'm so
Well, you
grateful for that.
had too many lessons that were like just life skills
Yeah,
that
yeah,
school would have taken way too much time.
absolutely. Yeah. And well, in school would have just skipped over. There's no way
Mhm.
we could have never caught up to the direction in the way that we did.
Yeah.
So that was my first year homeschooling was sitting at the table after we came home in February and shaking and quaking under the table, hoping they didn't see how scared I was. Had no way to communicate very well. And
Right.
we started from there.
Mm.
My son Kenny at the time, was 12 and was unable to read at a first grade level.
Mm.
He had acquired a lot of English at that point and was a pretty good speaker of English, but there was clearly something really wrong, and we couldn't figure it out, and the school couldn't help us. So there we were, and
Yeah.
as they say, thus the story beginneth.
Right. So talk about challenging situations. I think you
It was a
you
little hard.
had quite a few.
Yeah, it was a little hard. Harder, I think, was undiagnosed disabilities that turned out to ultimately be, identified individually and then turned out to be under the umbrella of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Um,
Yes.
both of the girls and Kenny
Mm.
struggle with that. We don't have a diagnosis for the girls, but it's very clear that that's what it is. It's too classic as well as a
Mhm.
history of recorded alcohol abuse by parents. So
Yeah.
um, that one, we didn't need to bother to spend the money for the diagnosis for that one. It was really clear.
Mhm.
Kenny took, we didn't actually get him diagnosed, I don't think, until 16, although we suspected, but getting a diagnosis for fetal alcohol syndrome can be pretty difficult. There aren't a lot of places that do it. And we were on a
Yeah.
waiting list for over a year to get him into a clinic at the University of Washington.
I was gonna say, I think universities are the go-to because when my parents took my siblings, they went to the U of M, and they were the only
Yeah,
ones doing this. They were doing a study at that point and
yeah.
just kind of included them in that.
hmm
So so yeah, that
Yeah,
makes
and we live kind of in a rural area in Colorado, and people
right.
didn't even know what I was talking about. We have pretty much gone through most of this without a whole lot of help from
Mm,
specialists, unfortunately, in part due to where we live. But
yeah.
so sometimes you have to be the one, the diagnostician as well as the educator.
Okay, so I'm going to quote you. I told Cindy I could quote her all day, but this was one quote I pulled off of her blog or your website. It says, "A worried mother is a better researcher than the FBI."
Yeah, I think that's really, really true.
I totally agree. That's why I wrote it down.
We ended up homeschooling for the first 3 years, maybe four, I can't recall exactly, through a hybrid program with the public school because I didn't feel like I could do it very well with the
Mhm.
challenging situation we had. Um, it turned out that that wasn't such a huge help, but we did get sort of official diagnoses at the time. But
Right.
um, nobody, basically, I had to figure out what it was, go to them, beg them to test my kids for it. Then they came back and said, "Oh, yes, that's what it is." And I said, "Yes, I know, but now I've got it on paper."
Right,
And I'm sure
exactly.
many of your listeners have had to do the same thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think
That's so
we
true.
special needs parents are a unique breed.
Yeah, definitely.
Google is our friend.
Google's a friend. Mindy says, "Cindy, wow, you're inspiring," and I'm And I am way better than the FBI. I'm pretty new to your Facebook page, and I saw that you started a business with your children. How is that going? Yes, she said, I have a 17-year-old guy on the spectrum. I'm strongly considering doing similar. And I've seen it over and over again that a lot of parents are making that choice. Can you talk a little bit about that venture and what you were diving into?
Yeah, so we did all these academics for a few years, and then kids grow up as they do, and our three that are involved in the business who have the serious diagnoses, they are graduating at 20 and 21. We just couldn't catch up enough in time with as far behind as they were. And as we got closer to graduation, it became clear that we may struggle to have real employment for them.
Yeah.
There is so much that they can do. And in an adapted environment where accommodations are made, they really, really do well. And fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is not always intellect. And in our case, with our kids, it's really not. It's more function. For those who don't know about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, there's brain damage. And yet often the child presents very normally until they don't.
They know how to work around all those little
exactly. Yeah. We found lots of memory challenges, short-term and long-term. Reteaching to a degree that you basically want to put a bullet in your own head and theirs too, because everybody's just frustrastrated. Logic issues. Incredibly.
Something that I found was very difficult.
For example, my son Kenny, he's incredibly bright. He's actually higher IQ. He can recite the entire history of the Roman Empire, and yet he can still not, and it happened yesterday, cannot remember the months of the year. Yeah, he's being treated. He also has bilateral cleft lip and palate and speech issues in his head. 7, 8, 10 surgeries at this point. We don't really know because we don't know what he had before us. And every time he goes to Shriners Hospital and he's asked questions about like his birth date or where he was born, he can't remember because he's put on the spot and anxiety makes him forget.
Exactly.
And then of course that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We've really struggled reading for him. For our daughters did not come with any difficulty. They learned to read very quickly in another language. But Kenny didn't really read until 13. But for those who have kids that struggle, by the time he graduated a year ago at 21, and really about 2 years before that, he was reading at a college level.
Yeah.
So
I saw the same thing with my oldest on the spectrum. He didn't read until he was about 10, 11, and then he was reading at a college level the next year. It's just like something needed to click.
Yeah. And then it does all that, the years of work that you put in, mom and dad.
Yes,
they do. Because if it does click, boy, does it really click. Often math is a real challenge for kids with fetal alcohol issues. One of my daughters really, really can't do beyond 3rd grade math, and we have done every remediation we can think of, and had tutoring and everything under the sun. And when it does not work, it is not going to work sometimes with that one.
And it's okay, I think, and that's what I love about when I was reading through your blog. It's like, let's look at what does work. Let's look at opportunities and possibilities for the future for our kids, for things they can do. Not
and that's
beating our heads about what they can't.
And there's a point where you keep trying, when you keep thinking maybe it can click. And then there are some things that really just aren't going to click, and dyscalculia is one of them that doesn't tend to really click. And so there's a point. It's not about giving up. It's about recognizing, let's move on, because demoralizing a child is not going to help. And your frustration developing comes out in all kinds of ways, which are really super unhelpful for the entire circumstance with your kids. It ruins the relationship. It makes your child feel like they really can't do things, and they can do all kinds of things, just not that. Yeah. So we went to a calculator at about, I think at about 16, we went to a calculator and said, okay. And so she knows processes and she can do all kinds of things with the calculator. But on the other hand, Kenny did pre-calc. So, every child is different, and there is no there's no
Right, you
cut
can
and
have
dry
the same
rule.
diagnoses, and I was on the phone today with a mom, she's like, "Okay, my child's on the autism spectrum, what curriculum should I use?" And I'm like, "Well, tell me about your child."
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not,
But
I
yeah, like there's
can't
that
really help you with
autism.
that. So,
Yeah,
we talked
I
for a
get.
long time, and yes, we finally figured out some options.
Yeah, well, and don't you wish it were that easy? Oh
I
gosh.
know, I know,
We
exactly.
unfortunately, my husband was absolutely super through all of this, and I'd buy things and they wouldn't work, and I'd buy things and try again, and nope, that's not going to work either. And he said, no matter how much you spend on curriculum, it's never even going to come close to the cost of one student for private school. So I get it. Just keep
That
trying.
is
And
so true.
yeah, and
Yes.
I think
Mhm,
sometimes none of us have money. None of us have extra money. We're all sort of
mhm.
struggling to make this happen. I think most of us are.
Yeah.
But when you really start putting things into perspective, the trial and error piece with kids that are special needs is
Mhm.
super important. You
It's
cannot stick
very
with something
important.
that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
pointless. And
Yeah, I
and I think that
so
begins to
agree.
create that friction between educator and students, and it can be avoided, but
Yeah,
you have to be willing to ditch it and try again. Um,
exactly. Yeah, one of
so
the articles we put on our website was when I said my middle one and I had finally that final draw, and it was I wrote about when your high school student derails your homeschool plan.
yeah, and it
It's
can happen.
yes, it can, and it ended up being the best thing for him, and he's still trying to figure it out, but aren't we all? So
I am at my
yeah,
age too, so.
yes,
So,
exactly.
so we decided, we had one of ours go try a job, a traditional job with somebody, and came home after the second day of training and
Mm,
was really, really upset. A little surprised that they couldn't handle the traditional way that somebody trains on a job.
hmm.
And I think that was a wake up call for my husband Dominic and I. And we realized we might be in bigger trouble here than we think because we have three that struggle like this, and other
Right.
issues with the other two. But so we were brainstorming, and over time, eventually came up with the idea of starting a business that they could run themselves. And so we started a pizza and ice cream business. We had taught entrepreneurship 2 years prior to starting this business. So my kids were aware. My husband has been self employed all of
Mm,
our married life mostly. He had a few years employed, but so for us, it was sort of a logical next step. It is
yeah,
becoming, as you pointed out, a logical next step for a lot of parents with kids with special
it
needs.
really is. Yeah.
And the federal government is beginning to recognize this too. There are more and more programs to begin to fund through um, disability programs, business startups in small ways for people with disabilities, because a lot of people can work if they can control their own environment.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so, this actually does seem to be the wave of the future that's going to help. I think a lot of people have employment that might not have otherwise.
Right.
So we have it's called Buckaroo Slices and Scoops.
Yeah, I'm gonna
It
bring
was a senior year homeschool project for the entire year, and
love that.
the kids really did it all. They did the business plan, they did the marketing plan, they did the physical labor of knocking down walls and building walls, both metaphorically and physically.
Wow.
Laid floors, painted, interacted with contractors and city officials.
Mhm.
Um, we studied at home, and they became ServSafe certified. My husband and I had both owned restaurants at different times, small little cafes. And actually, our kids were ServSafe certified. My youngest was 11, so we were refreshing. And
Mhm.
we also have one who is a manager trained as well as I am, and she passed the manager training. So
Awesome.
there's a lot that can be done, and
Mhm.
then we learned how to hire and how to train employees, and we
Mhm.
researched equipment and budgets, and honestly they really did every step of it, not totally by themselves, I won't pretend that, but
Mhm.
what kid could at 20 or 21 who's never done that?
Right.
Honestly,
Yeah.
yeah, they needed the guidance that any young person starting a business would need.
Mhm.
And
Well,
then
even older people starting, if you've
sure.
never ran a business, to understand the ins and outs of all of that,
Oh
it
yeah,
does
and
take
then
a
there's health department and food safety and construction
oh,
and
yes.
permits, and yeah, it's a confusing process. So
Mhm.
Um, but they grew up around it, and it was a real natural fit for them in many ways. They had helped my husband in his businesses multiple times. They had a very strong work ethic. we talked about that a lot before they started, and about, do you realize the number of hours that you're going to have to work to make this fly? This is not going to be a gimme. And
Yes.
they actually sort of laughed at us and said, when we go to work with Dad on Saturdays, we already work 12 hours a day. So I guess we sort of get what that's like. So I guess we trained them well for this.
Yes,
And
exactly.
they are indeed working 12-hour days on their work shifts. So
Wow.
with no complaints, the work ethic piece with special needs kids, if you can hone that for them, you're going to be way ahead of the game. It may be more imperative to be able to have somebody who really knows how to work hard if they're going to struggle, because employers today will take them if they'll stick and work hard. A lot of people today won't work hard, and they'll take somebody they
So
have to work with a little more who
true.
they know will actually do the job well. So yeah, so we've been open since October 15th, and we have 2/3 of our staff have disabilities. And I'm kind of proud to say that at this point, I'm not there. They're literally doing all of the work themselves. We do have my youngest son is working there, and he does not have any learning challenges. He did have reactive attachment disorder when he was young, and we struggled through that. But
Right.
he also tested gifted with the school district, and we're moving in new directions with him. And so yeah, so we really do have the spectrum in the family. Um,
Right.
and so we have a handful of really special employees who don't have disabilities also, who what has been fascinating is to watch how this environment has come together with people of all sorts of function. I have employees there with autism. Uh, we have employees and a couple that are volunteers because their parents didn't want to mess with dealing with disability issues and payments. But we call them employees. A couple of employees that have Down syndrome. We have one with a traumatic brain injury. We really have some real challenged employees. And what's fascinating is when given a chance in a supportive environment where it can be at the right pace,
Right.
every one of them is making a pizza. Every single
Wow.
one of them is running the cash register. Some of them cannot make change, but all of them can run a cash register and take an order and scoop ice cream. And almost every one of them, when we interviewed, didn't know if they could do any of it. And
Wow.
so that has been really
That's
rewarding.
just
And
gotta make their, self-worth just
oh,
skyrocket. And
yeah, seeing the changes in some of them has been incredible. And
mm,
also watching my own kids who struggle mentor other kids who struggle, or young adults. I shouldn't probably call them kids anymore. Um, has also been really rewarding for us. The patience there and the understanding, and the reassurance that it's okay to make a mistake. My
right.
my one daughter Angela, on one of our soft openings, it wasn't her fault, but she dropped 3 pizzas on the floor because the bracket for the pizza machine didn't work. And
Oh
it
no.
wasn't locked in place, and she put the pizzas in, and it slid right out and fell on the floor. And
Oh,
in our house we just laugh.
right.
We laugh because it doesn't do any good. And then one of our other employees, who puts a lot of pressure on himself, um, dropped a pizza out of the oven not too long after that. And she was able to look at him and say, "Hey, remember, I dropped 3. This is no big deal. You're still
Right.
got 3 to go before you meet me." So yeah,
Oh,
that's been it's been a real blessing to see people thrive who other people think can't do anything.
right. Yeah.
And the limitations put on because somebody doesn't want to adapt things a little bit, it's
hmm
actually shocking to see the contrast between what people think certain people can do and what their limitations are, and what, when given a chance, they really are. And
Mm-hmm.
the limitations aren't as bad as many people think. So
Right. Well, I think because we put in a box
yes,
what this job should look like, and we don't think outside that as
no,
to what are the possibilities for making this position happen.
yeah. Well, and
And yeah,
it's interesting because we also recognize the need to adapt and and partner together this way. So
mm,
everybody's covering for the area where they don't have a gap. So Kenny, my son, the one who did pre-calc, did all the food cost analysis down to the penny. We know how
mm,
much every slice of pizza costs that goes out the door, no matter what topping is on it. He did all of it, did charts and everything else. And
wow.
believe it or not, he cannot make an Italian beef sandwich. The process of physically grabbing, a boat and the paper and the bread and what order does it go on? he still hasn't mastered that. And he says, I'll just go
Oh.
do the dishes and someone else can do that. So the mixing and matching of roles there has been one way to accommodate people who can't do certain pieces. So if somebody can take an order but
Mm-hmm.
can't make change, we partner them with somebody who can. And they can be left alone to take the order and someone else watches and jumps over real quick to make the change and then leaves. And then the
Right.
person is pretty independent. And, that's a
Mm-hmm.
2-second piece of the whole transaction. So yeah,
Right.
it is adapting in different ways, but honestly, it's been kind of seamless. I think as long as you start thinking that way, and
Mm.
then as we set up the business, because our kids struggle, we just thought that way. We thought we need charts that tell them exactly what happens with each step. And
Right.
we have ordering charts for everything, and we have reminders on calendars on phones, and
Well, and
everything we can think of.
if they need it, they can use it, and if
Yeah,
they don't, then,
yeah,
that's a process that they don't need that for, but it's always, I mean, we all have off days, and don't we like
sure.
reminders of how to do
Well, I
something?
don't know about you, but I live by my Google Calendar, so
Right, exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
and there might be a little more reliance on tools,
Mhm.
but who cares? They can still be successful and just use the tool,
Mhm.
and that helps. So, yeah, and we're still learning. Lots of things that are slowly shifting and changing, and
Right.
it's a moving target a little bit, but
Mhm.
overall, we've been super super happy to see. Like literally, um, I'm not there, and they're handling things very well. And we communicate back and forth a lot on Messenger and things like that, but
Right.
the questions are questions that a lot of people would have no matter what.
Mhm.
And if the first time they encounter challenges with a customer or something breaks, or who do we call, those kind of things. So
Right, yeah.
yeah,
It's
it
nice
has
to have
been
that
really
safety
successful.
net.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, and all of us, when we do something new, we need to know there's somebody there we can tap if we get stuck.
right.
And
Yes.
people who struggle might need to know that a little more firmly. But
Mhm.
once they get it just like we do.
Right.
There's no difference really.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that helped with your homeschooling before that, 'cause
Yeah.
your kids knew they could rely on you, and now they're building a larger network of employees,
Yeah.
and they're being the example that
Mhm.
yes, we have the safety net, we have these people who are supporting our business, and they happen to be mom and dad, but they know what they're doing,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely,
And we started really early on, as soon as we realized maybe entrepreneurship was going to be at least for a couple of our kids. And we weren't necessarily thinking of this in particular because, like I said, we did teach. I used a textbook and we taught it and brought in a lot of real life experiences, which they had already seen. I mean, my kids have at church, they've been reading the financial reports for years because they know how to and understand them. So, there were skills that were already built in, but we did start young teaching a
Mhm.
lot of those things because
Yeah,
whether somebody owns a business or not, if they're going to be a church member, they need to know the finances of their church. There are
yes,
all kinds of ways in which you can learn how to read financial reports and need to use that skill.
yeah.
Um,
Oh,
there's
there's
all
so
kinds
many
of ways.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, and whether you work for somebody else or yourself, you need to know customer service skills.
Mhm.
And we started on that very young, when we had the restaurant at our local airport, which services the ski town of Telluride. Our kids literally worked there. Our older ones from the moment they came home, but our two that came home young, 4 years old, and they would
Wow.
wear the apron really wrapped around 3 times around their waist, and they bussed tables, and we paid them 50 cents as they would help clean things up and wipe shelves. But they learned a work ethic. And
That's
no, we weren't slave drivers.
well, no, and was saying that you just keep talking to your children, building vocabulary, but you take that a step further. Let's get them
Yeah.
involved in what we're doing,
Yes.
doing life. Getting out in these experiences, and it's not just the education stuff; it's life stuff
Well,
that
we and now I've seen this phrase multiple places, but I think we really did it without needing to have the catchphrase. We did life together. What we
yeah,
did, our kids did with us. My
yeah.
husband also owned an auto detailing business at the same time. The two businesses were partnered, and um, so they were seasonal, and they would occasionally go out and detail cars with him, to earn a little extra money. And it wasn't all the time, but they did do it in the insides of motorhomes and stuff. And they were able to observe how he dealt with customers. And he would stop and say afterwards, "Did you see what happened there? Did you understand why I responded that way?" Um, teaching that the customer is always right, but once in a while they're not, but
Mhm.
they still are. And, you know, the
That's hard.
daily, yeah, and employee issues, we would talk about them honestly. We did a project, I think that my youngest was 10, so the others was probably 14, 13, 14. We purchased a repossessed home. It was a modular home here in town, and
Wow.
we really did it solely for school.
Mm,
I know that's lame, but we didn't have a whole lot of years to catch up. When you bring home kids that are 8, 10, and 12, you go to extremes.
right. Well,
And
but
so we,
that's
we did that as
so good.
about a 4 or 5 month project. They
Mhm,
learned drywall, they learned plumbing, they learned some repairs. The house had been pretty beat up. They
mhm,
used math to calculate the square footage for carpeting and flooring and paint. They painted the interior and exterior, moved gravel, spent a whole week painting fences, just did,
mm.
but they did all the planning for it too. And um, that was probably a crazy thing to do. But then when they did that, they also they interviewed renters. We used it as a rental. We did it for about a year and a half. Um, Turned out that was not what we were all built for, especially after it was a little destroyed. We went in and repaired it again, and they said, "Let's put it on the market." So we all, as a family, agreed to that. But um, I think I'm probably one of the few people that can say my kids literally put the roof on my house, because the profit from the sale of that home was enough to give us a new roof and living room furniture, and we let them pick out the living room furniture, and they had to
Wow.
plan, how much money do we have to budget for this? What do we need?
Mm,
What's practical? And
right.
that was at, maybe 11 and 15 for most
Mm,
of it. So um, every decision we have made, they have talked us out of things. We looked at a couple of different business ideas, and as we all sat down and talked it through for 2 or 3 hours as a family and ran numbers on the school whiteboard, they literally looked us in the eye and said, "I don't think this is a good decision." And we said, "We think you're right." And these are kids with real serious learning challenges, but the
wow.
intellect is there,
Yeah,
and you got
definitely.
to work with it to
They
bring
just
it
want
out.
a little guidance, and yeah,
Yes.
when they hit those points where they can't figure out how to make the decision, it's you just kind of walk them through that
Yes.
decision making process, and
Yes.
it's not only teaching them how to make decisions, but it's teaching them how to apply it to real life situations.
Well, for example, when we allowed them to have control over um, the purchasing of the living room furniture, I had
Hmm.
wanted to buy a new couch about a year earlier, and Kenny looked at me and he said, "Mom, is that a want or a need?" Talk about
Oh,
calling me out at 14. And I said, "Oh
yes,
man, okay, you're right. Right now, I think it's probably a want." And then a
right.
year later, we had the money, and then they budgeted it. But later, as we were considering this business, um, we were looking at a pizza oven, and they are ridiculously expensive. Um,
Yes.
and so they combed through eBay, and we found a used one, and it was it was half the price of a new one. And it
Wow.
needed, once we got it, it needed a few repairs, but in the long run, they still looked at saving about $17,000. And
Wow.
so, but they knew how to do that process because we
Hmm.
had practiced, long ago on all kinds of skills. So you
Hmm.
do build on it slowly. But
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
kids, special needs or not, are capable of a lot more than we often
Hmm.
think that they can. But it's our job, like you just said, to walk them through.
Yeah.
How do we evaluate opportunities or decisions, and then start turning some over to them?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to do that.
Right, you do. You have to let go little by little.
Yeah.
Mindy says it's been very liberating to realize that learning doesn't end at 18, and a four-year college isn't everyone's plan. There are other avenues to success.
Yes.
Yeah, homeschooling can last. And most states don't have a cap to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
when you have
Well.
to graduate a child, especially when they have special needs.
Yeah.
It's just keep teaching if they're willing to learn, and
Well,
it's
one of our sons, the one who is twice exceptional, he he was he was a college learner, could have definitely handled college, but elected to opt out of college and self-educate for computer website design and programming. We told him, we will give you 4 years as if you were going to school, and you had better be a full-time student, and he really was, and is. He's in his third year. Um,
awesome.
so he designed the website for us, but right now he's designing an app and delivery software. for the pizza business,
Awesome.
and he's already done a website for a local chiropractic office, and he has taken classes through edX and Coursera,
Mm-hmm.
and found, I don't know if anybody's familiar with GitHub, but GitHub has an outline of classes you can take from multiple sources to have the equivalent of a bachelor's in computer science. And so he's following that track. So he has self-educated and is really we're starting to see some real product from that education.
Right.
And that's not official learning kind of, in quotes, quote unquote, official, but
Yeah.
it's real and it's practical and it's paying
Mm-hmm.
off. And that's a kid who could have gone to college very easily, but
Mm-hmm.
the cost factor for us was not going to work too well, and he was going to have to come up with it all on his own, and he elected to try something different. So,
Yeah.
whether it works in the long run, we don't know, but we'll see. We trust him. We trust
Mm-hmm.
him, and
Yeah.
let him find his way. But
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with good experience.
no,
My son went to welding school before he went to college,
uh-huh,
and it ends up he needs his degree in order to get a job in
sure,
biomedical engineering, and but he started beating himself up about going to welding school first and learning to weld. And I looked at him, I said, what engineer knows how to actually build something?
yeah,
Most of them
exactly.
can like write it
You
out on
really
paper
know,
and do the math, but they don't know how to build it. So
absolutely,
that's
yeah.
a huge advantage. And yeah,
Well,
that
and
is
sometimes
a
we don't
mistake.
stop to think that most of our learning stacks. It's foundational, and
Mm,
things that we never thought would connect to something else really do end up connecting. I remember for myself,
yeah.
when I was a kid, I worked at Save On Drugstore, which is no longer in business, but Osco Drugs bought them out, and I ended up working in the pharmacy for about a year and learned a little bit about insurance. And then I moved on a couple of 3 years later. I ended up in insurance billing for
Hmm.
my brother-in-law, who's a physical therapist. And I already had a little background knowledge from that. And then I ended up becoming an insurance agent and selling health insurance later on in life. And I did that for 7 years. And I never would have known that something I did at 17 or 18 was going to build to be something I did at 30.
Mm-hmm.
And, for our kids, we need to remember every experience might be tapped somewhere. And there's, like you said, there's no learning that's a waste of time. There's just none.
Right.
It's all,
Yeah.
you don't know when you're going to use it.
Mm-hmm. And I think we as parents tend to beat ourselves up the most when it's those things we feel like we've been a failure to our children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those
Boy.
really challenging things that we and they end up learning the most from.
Well, and we forget you cannot teach it all. You
Yes,
can't. There's too much in
that
the
is
world today, and even more so today. There is twice as much to know today than there was in 1950. If
yeah,
one even just throws in
yeah.
technology and
Mhm.
software programs and you know artificial intelligence and everything else under the sun.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
if you teach the foundations of how to learn,
mhm.
and if you can somehow manage to instill in your child a desire to learn and to self-educate when they need to, you've
Yeah.
won. You've won.
Mm.
You don't have to have taught it all. We need the
Mhm.
foundational stuff there for sure. They need to read and write pretty well
Right.
and math as best as they can do. But
Right.
but if they know how to teach themselves from that point on, it's home
Mhm.
free. Anything they want, there are a million resources out there if somebody has the desire to want to learn.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
that was
Mhm.
one of my key goals when I started homeschooling was I wanted to make sure that my kids um, somehow had had like an intellectual curiosity that they graduated with.
Yes,
And I thought,
because you can't get that later. You either
you
it
can
phases
ruin it.
out, you can ruin it. And
Yeah.
okay, so I'm gonna put this out because my parents homeschooled some
Uh-huh.
of my adopted siblings, and because of a health issue with my mom, ended up putting them back in the public school into the special ed program,
Uh-huh.
and it ruined one of my brother's work ethics. They
Yeah.
they can't get it back.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
is now sucked into the way that teenagers, they were told. He was basically told over and over again, you're not going to be able to do anything, so why don't you just enjoy this program? We'll have this little thing that you can go to here, and then we'll pacify you with this here. And he's bought into it,
Yeah.
and
And that's
it's
almost
really sad.
impossible. It almost is impossible to break once a learner gets to that place.
Hmm.
It can happen once in a while, but it's pretty difficult to move them out of that mindset.
Yeah.
And that's sad when that happens. And you know, we sometimes don't realize that we inspire our children by challenging them,
Yes.
not by things that are so hard they can't succeed, but by
Right.
real work, real
Mm-hmm.
concrete projects,
Mm-hmm.
really working on the car engine. You don't realize
Yes.
that really working on learning how to change the oil in the car and then stepping back and letting them do it and fail,
Mm-hmm.
do it and then fix it, that
Yeah.
when they're 25, that's going to pay off in ways
Mm-hmm.
that don't look like it's connected to changing the oil in the car, but it does.
Yes. Because they're going to persevere through other things that
Yeah. Well,
maybe.
and we all want to feel like we're learning things that we can really use in the world too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
academics are great. We actually homeschool for leading the Blue Collar Homeschool group. We actually homeschooled a little more academically than a lot of the members of my group do, but we also threw in a lot of the other things. So we kind of like tried to cram a whole lot in. We homeschooled year round for the first 8 years. Um, but interestingly, my kids never complained and they never seemed to be bored. I think because we mixed it up an awful lot. We did do
Right.
textbooks, but we did do a lot of hands-on learning and real
Mhm.
life stuff. And you can kind of suffer through the book stuff if you know you're going to get to the good stuff later.
Right, and they may ask for it. Like my daughter, we took some time off last year. She could have graduated at 14, and I just said, "No,
Yeah,
we're not done. You got to
yeah,
like learn stuff, like real stuff, not just
yeah.
the book
Real
stuff."
stuff.
And so we stopped doing. I mean, she was doing college algebra at
Yeah,
14 and physics, and I said, "No, we're taking the rest off. You're going to do some of these classes. You're going to work on these practical things."
yeah.
And then she was begging me for the physics book at the beginning of this year. And I said, okay, we'll finish physics, but you're still
Okay,
doing other stuff.
you do realize that, Peggy, that's an unusual one to say, okay, I'll let
I
you finish
know.
physics.
So
Oh,
on the screen right now is Cindy's Facebook group. So if you want to
yeah,
check
and,
that.
and, and let me tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah.
I started the Facebook group because we had kids that clearly weren't going to go to college. And as a parent seeking homeschool information, I felt so alone. Everybody
Yes.
I talked to seemed to be
Everybody's talking
homeschooling.
about what grade school their child's got into or they graduated from.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, and their SAT scores, and it's almost as
right.
if everybody's in a competition to prove that they do it better than public school. And I never
Mm-hmm.
viewed it that way, and then I couldn't view it that way. I would have destroyed my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, maybe I'm like one of the only parents out there that isn't shooting for Harvard, right? Um, and but I thought somebody out there, seriously, somebody else has got to be struggling with their special needs learners or just kids who maybe are just
Just
destined to
out of
be
the
auto mechanics
box.
because they love it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
My dad was a test flight mechanic with Hughes Aircraft, and my mom was
Mm.
an assembly line worker. And my husband, although he's an entrepreneur and has owned his businesses all the way through, he went to auto mechanic school and started in that direction. And he was an
Mhm.
auto detailer, and he made
Yeah,
sandwiches for a living. Although you own the business, it's not glamorous work, but
right.
it paid the bills. It, helped
Mhm.
us provide for me to be home with our kids all those years. And it's honorable work that often pays really, really well, and kids aren't being
Mhm.
told about it. And
Yeah,
so, I don't know about you, Peggy, but in my era, I wasn't homeschooled. I was public schools,
yeah,
and
I was.
we had like a regional occupational program for like 5 high schools that fed it, and you could learn everything from like
Mm,
being a certified dental hygienist to floral arranging to auto mechanics and auto body repair. And
mm,
that was in high school, and you'd graduate with a real career. Those
right.
days are long gone. You don't learn
Oh,
that in
they
high school
are
anymore.
completely.
Yeah.
Well, even in the
And
special ed programs now, they teach them academics up
yeah.
until 18, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we'll throw in some of those life skill things
Yeah, let's
after
teach you how to write a
18.
check at 18. Yeah, I
Right.
know. I know, I know. Yeah, and remember, family class used to be pretty standard for most of us, and you learned
Right.
about families and
Mhm.
and child raising. No, not anymore. We don't think those things are important, although
Yeah,
all of
or
us will probably do it.
sewing and cooking.
Yeah, yeah, real things. But
Those necessary
not,
things.
yeah, you don't have to sacrifice the academics to throw some of that stuff in there, right? But
Right.
and so I started a web page that I basically put a lot of my links on myself, and it was really for myself so that I could find them later when we hit maybe that stage later on.
Mhm.
And 3 years later, somebody wrote me an email, and I forgot I had done it. I was really teaching myself Weebly to design a website, and I forgot
Uh-huh.
I had created the thing. And somebody emailed me and said, "Hey," and asked me a question about one of the links, and I was like, "What are they talking about?" Oh, I did. And And then I thought, well, one person needed it. I wonder if Facebook groups had started to really become a thing. And I thought, well, let me try that and see if there are other families out there like us. Because
Right.
it was beginning to be clear at that point that we were going to be walking a non-college path in some ways. And
Mm-hmm.
lo and behold, there were a handful of parents and a few more than a handful, and we've grown, and we're
Yeah.
we're a group where people find the most amazing things for their kids. They're
Mm-hmm.
outside the academic box, and their kids are doing extraordinary things that are not traditionally celebrated. And that's a shame because they're real accomplishments and it's real learning, and a lot of it's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. Building a
Yeah.
barn at 15 is not an easy task.
Oh
Many
goodness, no.
people can't at 15, yeah, and so, but there are also an awful lot of resources there because a lot of the families in the group obviously probably have kids with special needs. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of conversations about, kids who maybe can function at a traditional level in one subject, but really can't in another.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and the brainstorming that happens there is pretty brilliant. I mean, because this is the place where a lot of people go, who the rest of it doesn't fit at all. And we've all
Right.
had, a lot of us have really had to figure it out. So there are a
Mm-hmm.
lot of resources online with Facebook groups, not just ours, lots of them,
Yeah.
where you can get a lot of help from people.
Well, and
And
Mindy even brought up Mike Rowe. He has been a huge advocate
yes,
for, out of the box non-college routes for
yes,
careers, especially, more of what we consider, blue collar type of jobs.
hmm
But because of the lack of workers, skilled trained workers in those areas, they pay extremely well.
oh
And,
yes,
and that's why my
very
son
well.
had pursued welding in the first place. It just didn't challenge him. So.
Yeah,
Who
yeah. There's
knows? He does it as a hobby, but
my 17-year-old has looked at that, and we've really talked about, but would you get bored with that every day because you're kind of a little more intellectual and a little more creative? And he's like, I'd like
yeah,
to think I would, you know, but
right,
probably, yeah, but there's a career out there for everybody, and
right,
and
exactly.
really every kid can do
Mm.
something.
And I
If it,
think we tend to we tend to put in the box our gifted children that they should go to college because that's the thing. And I'm seeing more that like just kills their creativity.
yeah, my son, the one who's doing computer science at this point, that's very much where he is. He took a AutoCAD at 13 and 14.
Mm.
He built and designed and built his own 3D printer because he wanted
Wow.
a gear drive instead of a belt drive or something. I have no idea because he's
Yeah.
like
Oh yeah,
9 years
we've
old.
got a 3D printer in our garage, so
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. And so he said, and he
know.
wanted to build a platform, and he says, "There's nothing made like what I want, so I'd like to build my own." And someone sponsored the project for him, which was very kind.
Wow.
But then he had to give a presentation on it at a level that the average person can understand.
Hmm.
And then he earned his pilot's license before he earned his driver's, or right after he earned his
I
driver's
saw
license.
it, Civil Air Patrol. My
Yeah, Civil Air
husband
Patrol.
was involved in that for years. That is
Yeah,
an
yeah.
incredible program.
Oh, it's a fabulous program. And so, I mean, we have talked very often about, he thanked me for homeschooling him because he said, if I had been in regular school, I would have never done any of the things that I've done. And he
Mm,
said, and then he laughed, and this was as we were talking about, what his post high school career would be like. And he said, and that sort of spoiled me. I don't think I can do like work in a regular classroom because I just want to go at my own pace. And he said, if I want to slow down and really dig into something or head off on a rabbit trail, that's what I want to do.
yeah,
And he said, I think I learned better that way. So, those gifted kids really are different too. And they need sometimes a
mhm,
little different than the average to really excel as well. And they do
yeah,
their spirit does get kind of crushed
mhm,
in a regular learning environment. And we don't often think of giftedness as special needs, but special needs is just special need from the average. Anything
right,
outside the norm.
yeah,
So
yeah. They
yeah,
just do things differently. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And they do think differently, very differently.
mhm.
You sit down with somebody who's truly gifted, and the conversation goes in very interesting directions sometimes.
So true. Yes, my
Yeah.
daughter has started now. She was doing art for so many years, and now we're into J fashion, which is like a Japanese, like over the top fashion. And she's making custom dresses. And
Oh
I was
wow.
like, okay, well, this is an interesting avenue to take for high school, but we're doing it.
And there you go, the beauty of homeschooling again, right? Sure, why
Exactly.
not?
Why not? Well, we're switching gears again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So,
Oh,
yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I think I wanted to make sure we brought up your website because we've shared your Facebook group and the
oh, thank
business
you.
of the kids, but can you talk just a little bit? I know you have a blog on there, and
Yeah, I have a blog, and I
you have
have
some interviews with different people in different professions.
Yeah,
Uh,
and unfortunately, as Buckaroo Slices and Scoops was in development, so to speak, and getting started, I had to sort of set that aside because Mom only has so
oh,
much time.
definitely. Yeah.
And it looks like I've got some breathing space now, so I'll get back to doing those. We're ultimately hopefully going to be interviewing a lot of people with blue collar jobs to ask
Mm,
them what got them to where they're at, what in high school would have been helpful had they been able to have it. And
right.
things to make it, and hopefully careers that people won't normally think of. We'd like to
Mm,
really feature
mhm.
that. But I have an awful lot of links to what I call average homeschool curricula. um, not necessarily the most challenging academically, and I hate to even put it that way because that sounds negative, but there are a ton of average learners. Let's face it, everybody isn't college
Exactly.
material, nor do they have a desire, and it doesn't. You can still provide a really solid
Oh,
foundational education without
mhm.
having to do the classics. you know uh,
Right.
I have
Well,
nothing against that, and
there's
we've done some
even
of it.
like there's some like science classes that are all video based. There's
Sure.
barely any reading in them, but the level of topics that they cover are
Yeah.
still equivalent. It just doesn't have all the jargon and the huge textbook to go
Well,
with
and
it.
what's fascinating to me, Peggy, is the truth is oftentimes when a gifted student looks at that stuff, they retain far more than they do from the typical dry textbook anyway.
Yes.
We sort
Yeah,
of dismiss certain things as easy when
mm,
really simple is the best way to get the message across, right?
it truly
Um,
is. And then they can
yeah,
dig in if they really are interested into that formula or whatever they're introduced to figure out how it works.
absolutely. Yeah, we did a lot of learning with film because visual support for FASD kids is huge. We did a lot of touching, feeling learning, but we found that video seemed to be retained a lot better. We
Mm.
we used the Ken Burns series, all many of his series for
Hmm.
history, and I'll tell you, they can still tell you what they learned from him, and we're 4 or 5 years out from some of that stuff.
That's
So
great.
yeah, I'm a strong believer in good strong video learning.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of special education curricula that's out there that,
Yes, there
although
are.
we call it special ed, some of it's the old school life skills that we learned when we were younger. Like
Right.
consumer math that
Hmm.
we actually really use in real life, and
We
business math.
you probably need that more than calculus.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't think I use calculus too much when I'm balancing my checkbook or doing my
Right.
taxes. And so my website has a ton of links to those kinds of things as well as we're adding to it regularly. Again, haven't as much this year, but I will be
Mhm.
getting back to that. Some post high school programs, we're going to be fleshing that out more. And
That's
I'm in
great.
our group. You can find mentions of all kinds of very interesting trade schools and programs that aren't
Mm,
necessarily
mhm.
that are career schools that are independent from everything from horseshoeing to violin making to, there are
Good.
even programs, believe it or not, for learning how to do distribution center truck loading. Yeah,
Wow.
seriously, there are
Huh.
all kinds of things out there nobody thinks about. And
Right. Yeah.
I kind of feel like my job is to highlight some of those things as well as
Mm,
lots of people in our community know of tons of them. So um,
yeah.
if you have a kid who doesn't have a clue what to do, and I have one of those right now at 17, um, check it out. There might be some things there that get you thinking in different ways. We have links
Mhm.
to the military and some other things too, which is often looked down upon as a career. But a lot of people come out of the military well trained for careers in law enforcement and firefighting, and
Yes.
even move into getting a college degree in the military and then move
Mhm.
out. So that's not a path that should be negated as quickly as it often is. So,
Well,
but I
some
even
kids
have
need the
yeah,
discipline.
and I also even have elementary education things on there because we felt like there were some things out there that were often overlooked from the big curricula. There's a few things in there that people probably don't know exist. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, there's so many resources, and I think, that this is being highlighted more, that people are developing more of those, and they're coming out of the, instead of just the college track. Because as I was having a conversation with somebody a couple days ago, it's like, yeah, I know so many college grads that are so in debt, and they're working at jobs like coffee shops because
yeah,
they don't have the skills to work anywhere else, but they have this college degree, and then they have the debt that they have to pay off, and so they're just stuck.
Well, if parents would concern themselves as much with giving their kids job skills alongside the academics for college, their
Hmm.
kids would be way better off because a lot of kids, their first job doesn't come until they graduate college. And you're
Yes.
years behind a lot of people at that point. You don't know how to
Hmm.
work with employers. You don't know how to work with fellow employees. You don't know how to work with customers. And those are real skills. And
Yeah.
we overlook them as being practical. And honestly, anybody who has a job works with coworkers.
Hmm.
And as we all know, having done it, sometimes that's a real challenge.
That's, yeah, more difficult than the more
Yeah, than the
technical parts
actual
of the
work.
job.
Exactly.
Oh, so
Exactly.
true.
Yeah.
Well, we've just got a couple more minutes left. If you're joining us live and you have a comment or question, we'd love to see. I'm Jose. I'm really sorry I missed you, and it looks like you didn't understand English. I'm sorry. We are only in English, so hopefully
Yeah.
you can get some more information in looks like Spanish. But anyways, yeah, we just thank you for joining us live tonight, and so yeah, I'll let Cindy wrap up with anything else she wants to say. And
Well, one of the things that I did want to say real quickly was that one of the things that helped us most through all of and I'm sure many parents can relate to this, the tears at the table and
yeah.
the real moments where your heart breaks and your child's heart is breaking at the same time.
Mm,
One of the ways we found to preserve the relationship the best was that we were on a team against the brain. It wasn't me against the child. It was
yeah.
me and them against that darn brain. We made that brain this entity that was outside of them.
Oh, I
And
love
we could both
that.
get really super mad at that brain that didn't want to work right today. And that
Mm,
we were
mm-hmm,
both equally frustrated. When you do that, you kind of
mm,
become an unbeatable team.
yeah.
Otherwise, it's impossible for the child not to personalize it. And the only
Mm-hmm.
way I learned that was, of course, by screwing it up, having my children look at me and the tears and realizing, oh man, I really blew it with the language I used, and by trial and error. And my kids have told me that that has helped them the most. That recognizing that it was the brain that was faulty, not their soul, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
That
Yeah.
who they are was perfectly fine, and
Mm,
that it wasn't their fault. Make it, there's nothing
mm.
to build a team like having an outside enemy, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and it puts you as their coach versus
Yes.
being their opponent,
Yeah.
because that is not the place you want to be, because they will naturally fight you because you're safe. But you
Yes.
you want to be behind them and teaching them and coaching them to fight the
Yeah.
real enemy.
And
And
that messaging is really, it sticks for the rest of their life. It really
does.
does.
Hmm.
So, and then you become their teammate for the rest of their life too. I mean, the messaging
Yeah.
works both ways, very positively or negatively. So, I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to throw that out there because it had been such a huge impact in our life to change the way we think. And I probably salvaged relationships by doing that.
And the relationship is the most important thing, especially as you get into those teens and the young adult years. You want them coming to you.
Yeah.
You want them to have a safe place.
Well, and as the parent, as the educator, you want to do a good job. And
Mhm.
you want your kid to fall in line so you can look like you did a good job so you can feel good about it, right? I mean, that's just
Right.
honest. And that's really not your kid's job to make you feel good about what you're doing.
No, it is not.
So easy to forget. I mean, it really is easy to forget in the trenches, but um,
Yeah.
you know, the ultimate thing at the end of it is the relationship. And that
Hmm.
sounds kind of canned, but in the long run, if you manage to educate your kid and they end up going to the Ivy Leagues and you have no relationship at the end, and
Yeah.
they haven't turned out to be a person of good moral character and
Hmm.
kindness has settled into them,
Yeah.
what's the point? What have you really done? And I always try to remind myself about that when we were having those really tough days, that that wasn't the most important reason why we were homeschooling.
And I'm going to quote you on this. You said, educating our kids to be confident, independent, capable, and kind human beings is what really matters.
Well, I guess I at least say the same thing more than once, right? I guess that really is my theme.
Oh,
Yeah,
but
I wholeheartedly believe that. And I think when it's hard and a child can't learn very easily, it's
mm,
easy to forget what really is supposed to matter.
yeah,
And you want an
it is. It
intact
gets so
heart when you
frustrating.
end. Yeah.
And you let the frustration take over, and
Yeah.
that's when it's not productive.
No, no, and it really is. It's I just keep going back to it. It's soul shattering.
Mhm,
And at
mhm.
the end, you know, at the end of 12th grade, you want to look at that child and see love reflected back at you,
Yeah.
and watch them in the world be a source of light, not a source of darkness.
Yeah.
And if you've accomplished that, boy, you've done more than a lot of people have, regardless of whether they can
That's
read at a
so
college
true.
level or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the indicator of success.
No, no. Yeah. I mean, it's
Unfortunately.
an
It's,
indicator, but it's not the most important one. It's about fifth or sixth on the list, really.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Cindy. This has been a really good conversation. I hope all of you that joined us have enjoyed it as well, and lots of good takeaways.
well, thank you for having me, Peggy. I appreciate it
You
very much.
you are welcome. This has been, I hope, has given you some inspiration on different ways to think about schooling, and especially in those really difficult circumstances that you face. That just trying to get your child caught up
Yes.
is not the goal.
No.
It's about helping them figure out who they are
Mm-hmm.
and how they can succeed.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and like we were talking before we started the video, there's no manual.
No, there's not.
It's not the same for every child either. So you just kind of
And
try it out.
and you know what? You got to forgive yourself when you make mistakes, and you're just
And you're
gonna
going
make
to.
them. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So true.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you
Well,
so
thank
much
you.
again, Cindy. I appreciate that. And you've been watching SPED Homeschool Conversations. This broadcast is put on weekly on Tuesday nights, 8 Central, on YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. And like I said, our theme this month is adoption. And so we have 2 more broadcasts. And next week we are interviewing Ethan Demi. He is the CEO of Demi Learning, which is Math UC and Spelling UC. But he's going to be talking with us about connecting with your adopted or foster child so they can learn and grow. And we're going to be kind of hitting the younger end of adoption and foster care, and connecting with kids that are maybe just coming out of those situations and trying to develop those bonds, which is so important. So we talked a little bit about RAD and reactive attachment disorder, and so we'll probably be talking a lot more about that next week. But so we'll see you there. Otherwise, we're going to continue this conversation. You can check out on our website, spedhomeschool.com. We just started our SPED Strong Tribes, and you can join your regional tribe and get connected there, where we're having a conversation all week long on different subjects and connecting with each other locally, which is so important. So, and make sure to check out Cindy's resources as well. They'll be listed later in YouTube and as well as Facebook feed. So thanks everybody, and have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
Bye.